Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So wonderful to see alum here and your guests. For those of you that I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Melanie Wooden, and I serve as the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Science. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined here tonight by my colleague, Dean Chris Yip, the Dean of the Faculty of Applied Science and Engineering, as well as the Chair of the Computer Science Department, Eyal Dallara, and other colleagues that you'll be able to meet after the remarks tonight. It's been great. We've been here for a couple of days, meeting with alum, many of you actually out in your startups and in industry, and really inspiring us to see what you've been doing there. But before we go any further, I'd like to take a moment to have us reflect on the place that we are right now. Since time immemorial, Indigenous peoples have been the stewards of this land. And tonight we want to acknowledge the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who have been the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and future. Now, tonight's talk is about artificial intelligence, and I don't need to tell this group that U of T is a global leader in AI. We're a global leader because of our outstanding faculty conducting the research like you're going to hear about tonight, the students they work with, but because many of you that had your educations and then came down here and started up companies and embedded yourselves in much of the tech ecosystem in this area. And we certainly heard a lot about that when we met with many aspects of the industry over the last couple of days. Of course, many of our faculty are incredibly well known in history and have been seizing much of the conversation over the last 6 months. Case in point, University Professor Emeritus Geoff Hinton, the godfather of AI. But we're also really an integral part of this area because of the investment we've made in entrepreneurship and innovation. So if you didn't know, we're in the top 5 globally when it comes to university-managed incubators. And that's led to our ranking as the #1 university in Canada for research-based startups. In fact, we've embedded entrepreneurs, enabled entrepreneurs to start up more than 600 companies and create more than 9,000 jobs. And we're going to hear a little bit more about that innovation in just a few minutes. But before we do that, I want to tell you a little bit about our excitement for Defy Gravity. Hopefully you've all heard of Defy Gravity, because that means that you're reading your emails. But if you're not, which we know can sometimes fall by the wayside, let me tell you about the historic campaign we're in. A couple of years ago, we launched this new campaign, which is the largest philanthropic campaign in Canadian history. And we have 2 really ambitious goals, one of which you're contributing to right now. And that's that we are aiming to inspire more than 225,000 alumni to get involved as volunteers, mentors, donors, participants, and to collectively contribute your time and talent to the university more than 1 million times. And so tonight, by being here, you're already contributing to that. So thank you. And we're also seeking to raise $4 billion for our highest priorities and our foundational commitments to inclusive excellence. As you'll know, we're a top-ranked, a globally ranked institution. But what's really important about that is the commitment that we've made to turn no domestic student away due to financial need. So we have excellence at scale. But of course, we need the support of our alum and donors to make that happen. And we are making it happen. In fact, more than 56% of our students receive, and that's about 100,000 students of the 56, receive some form of non-repayable financial aid. So Defy Gravity is really inspiring us to do what we've done well for many years, and that's to engage in social mobility and social progress. As you can see, I'm a really proud alumni too, a graduate in both 95 and 97, and also now a professor in the Department of Cell and Systems Biology. I could go on about my pride for this university, but without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Chris Yip.
Thanks, Melanie. I'm just going to echo the comments. Thank you so much for spending some time with us tonight here for this amazing event. It's going to be really exciting to hear from our guest speaker about the innovations that are coming down the pipe in terms of artificial intelligence and its application to materials. I'm going to step back a little bit. This has been a super exciting year for engineering. We just celebrated, or we are continuing to celebrate our 150th year as a faculty. For those who are in Toronto, April 1st, and we didn't pick the day. The students picked April 1st as the day to celebrate, April Fools. We filled the Royal York, 1,500 participants. It got to the point where the Royal York turned the lights on and said, you guys, it's time to go. You've actually passed it. It's bad. This was an amazing event. It filled the idea of Defy Gravity because we had Chris Hadfield come and know who was better than an astronaut to talk about the Defy Gravity campaign for engineering and for the university as a whole. We are so incredibly grateful for the support of our alums to the community, whether it's mentoring students to our hatchery program, whether it's being a guest lecturer, and we've actually spoken to a number of alum. In fact, an alum just today at lunch, we found out it's like, hey, I actually come back and give a lecture in chemical engineering because it's an opportunity for me to talk about what my career path has taken me, and so I can help inspire the next generation of engineers as well. Whether it's hiring a PUI student. I just spent the last couple of days down in Sunnyvale and Palo Alto meeting our amazing undergrad students who are participating and working at companies like Tesla and Intel and in Apple, and finding out where our alums have gone, be leaders at Juniper Networks or at Databricks, and seeing what they're actually doing. It's an amazing opportunity. So again, as Melanie pointed out, Defy Gravity is our largest campaign. It's an incredibly ambitious goal for us. U of T Engineering is here to really educate the next generation of innovators to design a better world and leading groundbreaking research. To develop intelligent machines that are going to help us make a positive difference in the world. So it's an exciting time for us. My remarks are short because I really want to get to turning the lights off. I didn't do that. What was that? That was cool. Now I'm going to turn the lights back on. Anyways, the power engineers wield over things. I think that's pretty cool. Anyways, I want to introduce Professor Alain Asper-Guzik, whose research lies at the interface of computer science, chemistry, physics, and if you follow his Instagram, there's a large artistic element to what Alain as well. I'm also going to point out that I've known Alain for, it's got to be what, maybe 7 years now? And I figure I've actually met him physically in Toronto probably less than 7 times. The majority of times we cross paths in Quebec City, we cross paths, walking randomly down in like around the world because he is always out talking about the research he's doing. And so I'm glad we actually got a chance to sit down over dinner to actually say, hey, Alain, we should really chat about doing stuff together. His work integrates robotics, machine learning, and quantum chemistry to really develop unique concepts, self-driving labs, to really accelerate rates of scientific discovery, quantum computing, algorithms. It's across the board. So my notes say, professor in chemistry, computer science. I'm looking at Melanie. Those are arts and science. And my notes are like, oh, wait. Engineering's here. So I had to do a little digging and remind myself that in fact, he holds an appointment in a very important department. It's chemical engineering and applied chemistry, my home department. So I have to give the props for that, and material science. So Alain, you're bifurcated. I'm just going to use that term between 4 different departments, 2 in arts and science, 2 in engineering. So we'll see where your allegiances lie in your talk, but also point to the Vector Institute. And I think this is a really important point because it really points about the amazing partnership that has been forged and is being forged between arts and science and engineering. To take basic science, to take approaches that Alain is developing, and then to bring them into sort of the applied side where engineering helps to translate these out and actually make them come to fruition. And it's an amazing partnership, one that has continued to grow. It's been an absolute honor to work with Melanie over the past 5 years now, because we're both started at the same time. We've both gone through COVID together. We've survived a lot of stuff together. But this opportunity to continue to build this partnership, which Alain is driving, it's really been the nucleus, actually, for this incredible partnership. He is the director, and you're going to talk about this, the Acceleration Consortium. And so I've talked about this a lot last couple of days. And this is a U of T-based strategic initiative. And I'm going to, I've been poking around with this idea for a few years. When we first met, you sort of this materials discovery, we need AI to do all this kind of stuff. And you wrote this proposal. And it resulted in the largest operating grant in Canadian history to a single institution of $200 million. Officially announced, what, maybe 3 or 4 months ago? And this is an incredible gift, I'm going to say, an incredible honor to the University of Toronto to drive this initiative. And it is leveraging partnerships from industry, it's leveraging university to an investment of over $500 million in this integration of AI, self-driving labs, really to accelerate material discovery writ large. And this is an incredible opportunity for us to become the world leaders in this particular space. Alain is currently the C150, so it's Canada 150, research chair in quantum chemistry. He's the CFAR AI chair at the Vector Institute. And he's a co-founder of 2 early stage ventures, Zapata Computing and Cabotics. So please join me in welcoming Alain Aspar-Guzik to the stage.
Thank you, Chris. I'm very, very happy to be here. I actually was born in the Bay Area. I was born in the Stanford Hospital a long time ago. And so therefore I'm happy to be back here. And I also studied my PhD at UC Berkeley. So I'm very, very happy to be here in the Bay Area. And I have to change my slides, I guess, to my slides. Sorry. 1 second. Obviously, I need to present. I don't know what happened here. Yeah, there. Okay. So the title of my talk is The Materials of Tomorrow Today. Hopefully, hopefully you see why. Well, a fact that I will try to tell you about during this talk is how slow materials and molecules are compared to, for example, software. Like, how many of you work on software today? Raise your hand if you work in any kind of software. I know there's some quantum computing folks from NASA. You should also raise your hand. It's quantum computing software, right? So software, right? You can make a startup for pet walking in a day, right? But if I tell you I'm going to create a new material to capture CO2 from the atmosphere or something like that, traditionally, every discovery in material science takes 10 to 25 years from discovery to commercialization, at least, okay? Name your favorite discovery, and let's talk about one that I really care about. Let's talk about poop, bird poop. Why don't we start talking about bird poop today at 6:47 p.m., okay? Guano was the most important fertilizer that existed in the world, and basically carried a lot of the human population. So Chile was a very rich country because boats were going all the way to Chile to carry poop all the way to Europe, right? And obviously then, some German scientists, Haber and Bosch, decided that this was not so sustainable. Let's actually come up with a catalyst to convert CO2 in the atmosphere, nitrogen in the atmosphere to ammonia to then make it fertilizer, right? And what they did is they actually enrolled 50 to 100, they enrolled several high school teachers, and they were able to characterize 50 to 100 materials a week. Okay? Those high school teachers were basically the equivalent of a modern undergrad, right? But anyway, eventually, after screening about 20,000 catalysts, they were able to find the catalysts that we still use today, basically industrially, to capture CO2 from the, nitrogen from the atmosphere. I don't keep saying this. Why is it so important to capture nitrogen? How many of you watched The Avengers? Raise your hand if you watched The Avengers Endgame. Okay, if you remember, half of the population of the world disappears at the end of the movie. Well, that would be exactly what would happen if actually we removed just that single materials discovery from humanity. Okay? The carrying capacity of the world is half of the current population. So the world will be maximum half of us, right? So you are here because of those 20,000 catalysts that were screened. And we could keep going on and on and on about discoveries that involve molecules and materials. So actually, the largest economic opportunity in the world, I argue, is not software. It's actually stuff around you, especially in the 21st century where we have problems about water filtration, now it's really CO2 capture, solar energy, batteries. Just the demand for batteries is a huge problem for the mining industry and for the ecology of the world, okay? So materials is what's going to take us to the future. So let me tell you a story that is very close to my heart and it's going to be part of the story. OLEDs, how many of you have a Samsung or iPhone phone? Raise your hand. How many of you look at it more than 6 hours a day? Be honest. Okay, you see, you spend most of your life checking Instagram in your phone, right? I mean, actually, Chris mentioned Instagram, right? Or Netflix or whatever, right? So you're actually watching at these little organic molecules emitting light at your eyes. Okay? O in OLED is organic. So interesting. Little molecules that emit light to you. Okay? So interestingly enough, Tang discovered the OLED phenomenon in 1987. 20 years later, so just to prove the point, 20 years later, it was first commercialized in a Samsung phone, if you remember the first OLED phones in 2007. Okay? Now, the OLED market is expanding. Now there's OLED TVs and so on. Right? So this is a success story of a materials company. That led to incredible wealth for Stephen Forrest, the inventor of this technology at Princeton. There's a company called Universal Display Corporation. It has an $8 billion market cap, 40 price to earnings ratio. Every time I check, it's a strong buy. If anybody can check right now, just shout to me if it's really a strong buy today, right? But it's always a strong buy. If you want to, all the technology is just growing. So it's good to buy this stock, and I'm not giving you stock advice, okay? But can we imagine a world where we're making companies like this all the time and innovating in healthcare, energy, etc., right? So that's kind of like one of my missions right now in life. So actually, all the ideas that I'm going to tell you about actually started a long time ago. Around 2012, an U of T postdoc, CIFAR, an U of T postdoc, came to Harvard University, where I was a professor at the time. And his name is Ryan Adams. And he actually started teaching me AI. And with Ryan, we actually use AI in a project funded by Samsung to come up with 3 new OLED materials. Okay? We actually use high throughput screening in a supercomputer, use AI, and we were able to down select from 1 million compounds about 30 or 40 to be made, out of which 3 were good enough to publish a paper in Nature Materials. The problem was that every time we came up with a compound, making it took a few months. Came back, making it took a few months, came back. So the project took a long time, basically because making and testing it was the bottleneck. So that is the bottleneck I started spending the last 5 years of my life trying to solve. The problem is AI is too good to coming up with materials. The problem is, how can we make those materials, right? How can we give hands to the AI to actually make it happen, right? So that's kind of the story of how we started working in OLED in my lab. And we came up with something, actually, Benjamin Sanchez-Lengeling, which I could tell you something about him, but I can't, Chris knows. Benjamin Sanchez-Lengeling, which is now at Google, fantastic former student of my group, and I wrote this paper in Science, telling you about the idea of the self-driving laboratory. So what we call this self-driving laboratory, like a self-driving car is trying to get somewhere, it's trying to avoid a bunch of obstacles, and it's closing the loop, right? Every time the self-driving car is looking at the environment, is making decisions. So we want to make a scientific laboratory that every time it does an experiment, AI updates its state and actually picks up what's the next experiment to make, and then what's the next experiment to make, and frees up the mind of the scientist to do more science and all the stuff that you do by hand. Who has done anything in a lab by hand here? Raise your hand, see if you have done an experiment by hand, right? It was not very pleasant, me injecting HPLCs as an undergraduate. I guess that traumatized me, and then I decided I make a robot that does that, okay? So I wrote a paper that I'll tell you about briefly in 2018, 5 years ago, that is a little bit prophetic. I actually like it because it has been a little bit prophetic, okay? I was thinking about what is the role of computational chemistry and theoretical chemistry in the 21st century. So I started thinking a lot about it. Actually, I went to a World Economic Forum meeting, and they were all talking about the 21st century and Industry 4.0. How many of you heard about Industry 4.0? Data in industry, all that stuff. So this is what they were saying about 5 years ago. This is what's going to lead the world in this century. And I added the last 3, okay? Those 3 are me. This is not the World Economic Forum. This is the Alan Economic Forum, okay? But you can see there the kinds of things that are really driving the world. Some of them, like the shared economy and Bitcoin was very popular 5 years ago, but you know, it's an example, right? So I came up with 6 challenges for theoretical or even chemistry for the 21st century, and I'm going to tell you about 2 today, but you can read them over there and read the paper. It's pretty cool. But basically, what I wrote 5 years ago was, okay, we want a computer, when faced with any complex chemical question, to answer to you in English or Spanish or French. We're in Canada. French. And also perhaps have virtual reality or other visual forms of information back to you. Okay? So that was kind of like the modern theoretical chemistry, what we have to be doing in the 21st century. Okay? So there was one challenge that is called the designer challenge. Okay? And at the time we were working with these things called generative models, which we're using as academics. Now everybody knows about generative models, GPT, ChatGPT, and all those things, right? They're older, they're way older, right? These things come back from the 90s, right? But we actually were using them in the 2000s to actually design molecules. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about that. So this is now my most cited paper, I think, or second most cited paper, with David Duvenol, one of my colleagues in computer science. He was a postdoc back there in Harvard. And Ryan and Rafa Gomez-Bombarelli, now a professor at MIT. Benjamin, now at Google. Dennis, a co-founder of my company. Everybody in this paper ended up doing super cool stuff. So anyway, in this paper, we were the first ones to actually make a generative model for molecules. Compresses molecular space into a low-dimensional vector, 200 dimensions or so. It's pretty small compared to the size of chemical space, which is 10 to the 80 possible molecules. And then decompresses it back into a molecule. So you might say this is the most stupid idea you want to think about. You're just basically making an AI that reproduces the molecule you give it, right? What is very nice about these models is they create a continuous representation of the molecules that you can use to optimize their properties. So why is that an important problem? Because up to then, theoretical chemistry was able to predict the property of a molecule based on the structure. But we want to do it backwards. We want to maximize the property and find out which molecule is the one that has the maximum property. And because this thing is differentiable and continuous, we can actually optimize over that surface and find out what's the best molecule that gives you a particular property. Why would you care about that, right? I'm going to skip this slide. Because you can imagine that that property is a drug for a particular application. So in this case, we actually used that technology in collaboration with a company called InSilico AI to actually show that in about 42 days from beginning of experiment to the end, including animal tests, we were able to find a DDR1 kinase inhibitor, which is a very simple, low-hanging fruit for drug discovery. But the fact that we were able to do it in 42 days with AI was pretty impressive. And now there's no major pharma company that is not using AI in their pipeline. The company that I work with has now drugs in stage 2 clinical trials, and they are growing really massively. And they are not the only AI company that does this, right? So this is only a paper. The paper came out in 2019. To me, it's like ages ago. It's only 4 years ago. And now AI for drug discovery is really like a thing, okay? Based on the work that we did there. Okay, so just last year, just to tell you what's happening up to today, we actually expanded this even further. We use AI 3 times in a triple hit, like in baseball, right? First of all, we use AI, basically unsupervised learning, to try to find out a target for liver cancer. Now that target, we wanted a target that had no protein structure reported, which means we had to use also DeepMind's AlphaFold to actually predict the structure of the protein, and then our AI to predict which drug goes into it. And this took 30 days, and we were able to find a lead candidate for this particular liver cancer. Just to tell you, that doesn't mean you have a drug. Many people in LinkedIn write to me and say, I know somebody with liver cancer, can you help me? Of course, this still requires, obviously, a whole entire final step of drug discovery, which could be many years still, right? To actually take that to a patient, like all the clinical trials. But it's interesting to see that now coming up with molecules happens in the real physical world. Not only, of course, in drug discovery. I started working very closely with my colleague Christine Allen at the University of Toronto. Stay tuned for some news there too as well. In machine learning for drug formulation, a very interesting problem. How to make the pills of all the stuff you take more efficient. So Christine and I can make many of the drugs you take twice as efficient, including cannabis or CBD and things like that. So talk to us about those things. Anyway, so now let's talk about the second direction that 5 years ago we wrote about. We called it at the time the matter computer. Now we call it the self-driving lab. But it's an idea as old as 1957. Perov Levine, one of the founders of quantum chemistry, said, if we're going to simulate molecules quantum mechanically, now with AI, but if we're going to simulate molecules in a computer, we want them to have properties that are valuable to humankind. In that time, they wrote mankind, but of course, humankind, right? And this is 1957, okay? that's kind of what we're here about, right? So in the paper, we wrote this, this nice dialogue between a chemist and a computer, and the chemist is trying to ask the computer or the self-driving lab to actually make them an organic LED. Okay? So this is exactly the dialogue we had in the paper. Now, in the last 8-9 months that ChatGPT came out, this is kind of not surprising to you anymore, right? So 5 years ago, I thought this was going to take longer, and now doing something like this is actually quite feasible, right? Talking to a computer, I'm not going to read this, but going back and forth and ask the computer, can you please give me a molecule? And the molecule will say, okay, my pleasure. Like a ChatGPT will have said that, right? And therefore, Organa, can you make me those Ferti compounds? So the hard part is here. How can I make those Ferti compounds? How can I test them for emission properties, right? So ChatGPT solved the first part of this problem, chatting, but now experimenting is what we're working on, okay? So that's where the self-driving labs come in, right? Now we're going to have to think about how to make this chemistry happen, okay? So obviously things always start historically. I like to talk history. I was born in 1976, so now you know my age. So 10 years before I was born, the first automated chemistry robot that I have seen is published, or one of the first. A 32-roller machine started synthesizing peptides, okay? This is the beginning of the automation of biology. Biology is way ahead of chemistry. They are automating everything already. And they started by automating the synthesis of their peptides, okay? This actually led to the Nobel Prize in 1984 to Bruce Merrifield for that solid state synthesis. Since then, the biologists, how many people are biologists here in biotech? Now people can synthesize, well, Melanie, yeah, and what's your name? Greg, Melanie and Greg. So now people can synthesize not only proteins, but also DNA, RNA, and sugars. Why is that? Because biology has a trick. Biology builds everything with Lego blocks. 21 amino acids, 4 nucleobases, etc. Okay? Biology uses blocks, and we'll come back to the Lego blocks in a second. But we want to imitate biology. If biology can make materials, your proteins, so easily with Lego blocks, we have to think about how to think about organic chemistry and organic molecular engineering in terms of Lego blocks. Okay? So now, close loop, this idea of the self-driving, we started working on finding out what is the first self-driving experiment. It came out in 1978, okay, 2 years after I was born, by a scientist that is still alive, Winnicott. He's retired from S&K of GSK. And basically, it was a basic computer program in a 16-bit PDP-11 computer. Okay? I never saw any of those computers, but I read a lot about them. Here is the abstract of the paper. This is the proto-paper of what we are doing nowadays in the world, right? So it's kind of nice to see a lot of the ideas that we're doing today, right, took 20, 30, 40 years to be actually realized, right? So anyway, the modern self-driving lab, this is a paper we wrote in 2019. It's all about combining automatic robotic platforms with experiment planning algorithms, right? What's going to be the next experiment? And you're going to use all sorts of tools from machine learning. Bayesian optimizers, neural networks, you name it. Regression trees. It doesn't really matter what tool you're using. It could be very simple, even a linear regression, right? It's already data science, right? All the way down to very sophisticated methods. They're going to adjust the idea is you want to have experimental data somehow in an internal model of the computer so that it can drive the next experiment. So you have to innovate in both things, automation and robotics, and also AI, and also three things, and also material science and chemistry. So what is the difference between high throughput screening, which was very popular in the 90s? In the 90s, people here in the Bay Area, Peter Schultz actually, was at Berkeley, started many companies. One of them was called Cimex, doing these kinds of things, robots that actually make molecules. The problem of that approach was that the robots were not driven by AI, so basically randomly picking molecules from chemical space and trying to make a new material sometimes works, but barely, right? The chemical space is so vast that you really need to have a guide to navigate it. There's more molecules possible to be made than atoms in the visible universe. So it was doomed to fail because it didn't have the data science. So a big lesson from this talk is that sometimes you really need for many technologies to converge for something to happen, right? Automation was here in the 90s, but we didn't have the AI to make it work. So many chemists keep saying to me, oh, automated robots in chemistry never work. All that combinatorial chemistry, as it was called, it was bullshit. Well, it was not bullshit. It was ahead of its time. I have to tell them it was ahead of its time. Okay? But now, if you actually use a generative model, like something like ChatGPT, or one of the models that told you that designs a molecule, Usually the molecule that will come out, your robot cannot make. So what self-driving has to do also is come up with molecules that the robot can make. And then iterate over that space. And this is what I'll be telling you about. Okay? So I will argue that the most important frontiers of innovation in chemistry are not all the things that traditionally you think about, but they are data science problems that the ones I'm showing you here in this slide. I'm not going to read them to you. Perhaps one of them, dynamic bias corrections, for example, is an example of one of them that I think will be very important to solve in chemistry. So I think these are some of the most important things that I have my graduate students working on, and my postdocs in my group and so on, trying to solve these kind of problems to actually make chemistry automated. So now let's talk about the application, which is called organic lasers. Okay? So what's next beyond the organic LED? How many of you saw the announcement of the Apple augmented reality headset? Raise your hand. How many want one? Raise your hand. How many have one? This costs $3,000 or something, right? Well, part of that is how much technology is in it, but one of the cool things about it is that if you were able to have an organic molecule that is a laser as well, emits light directionally, it could actually be able to track your eyes and emit light to you in a transparent way to your eye. And you could have, like, for example, maybe augmented reality in my glasses here, okay? Which is really cool. So we're trying to think about that technology. That doesn't exist yet, but why did we pick that? We picked that because we said, if that technology started to happen, right, around 2018 when we started thinking about this, that's the clock. We're going to show that we're going to be faster than 20 years, right? So I had to pick something that was at the edge of imagination when I started working on this, right? Notice that it's been 5 years, so it's already been 5 years since I thought about this. So, but I'll show you how far we are. Actually, we are very far. Okay, so let's just begin with the story. How many people have read this book, Plastic Fantastic? How many of you know who's Hendrik Schon? Okay, Hendrik Schon is the biggest fraudster in material science. I mean, a long time. Okay, this guy, he has actually fooled many, many different people at Bell Labs at the time. And he said he produced an organic semiconductor, an organic superconductor, and an organic laser. Okay? And he was caught, obviously, but he wasted the life of many scientists trying to reproduce his results. And one of them was my friend and collaborator and hero, Professor Chihaya Adachi in Japan. He was a postdoc in the lab that did this organic light emitting diode company, UDC, and he was trying to reproduce the organic laser. Imagine how many years Chihaya wasted as a postdoc trying to do this. So Chihaya never stopped. And in 2018, he published the first organic structures that actually are promising for making a solid-state organic laser. Started a company called Koalatech. And that's when these papers came out, we said, we're going to use our self-driving lab to actually explore this space. Since then, only about 7 more molecules or so have been published from Chihaya's lab and around the world. They are so hard to make, hard to test, and they are like needles in a haystack. You vary them a little bit, and then they suck again. Okay? So can we use AI to actually find better organic lasers? And that's our story. Why would you like to have an organic laser? I guess this is an old slide. The only thing I should show you is the Apple thing, right? Because it's so cool. These are other applications, but think about the Apple glasses. So to do this is something very important. This has to be multidisciplinary. This is a University of Toronto-led, US-funded DARPA project with 5 other PIs around the world, 4 funded and Chihaya that is not funded. Okay? These are all the labs around the world that did this with $12 million from DARPA over 5 years. Okay? So it's a large project. So I took out a lot of the experimental stuff. This is not a chemistry talk, but this is how my self-driving lab looks like. And there's many photos. University of Toronto loves to take pictures of it. So you probably have seen it in some pictures. If you are in Toronto, I can ask my students to give you a tour or something. But it actually makes the molecules here, separates them here, and tests them here. And in about a weekend, we can actually test about 40 molecules, a little bit more. It's as low as this HPLC. Now we have two HPLCs, so we should be able to do this twice as fast. Okay, so how does it look like? This is my robot. This is the most expensive salt and pepper shaker in the universe. It actually weighs chemical powders, and we control it with Python scripts and computers and so on. And you can see the robot there weighing very, very, very effectively that particular palladium catalyst. So this is automatic powder dispenser. Then this is the reactor. You can see the arm actually going around there and doing some chemistry and so on. That's where the reactions happen. And then now it's going to pick out the liquid dispenser and so on. So it just gives you an idea of how this looks like. Now, Chris talked about engineering at the University of Toronto. Melanie told you about arts and sciences. This is a combination of both. Here is an engineering project. We submitted a paper on this $5,000 version of what you saw. There was $1 million. This is kind of like the homemade, bottom-up version of this that does most of the reactions that I'll show you about were done in this and not in the expensive robot. So this is our homemade version. Inspired by a professor in Urbana-Champaign, this is our optimization of it, but this is bottom-up engineering of how to make these things happen, okay? And now I'm gonna tell you about our project. We call it ACDC, Asynchronous Cloud-Based Delocalized Closed-Loop Discovery, okay? How many of you know what ACDC is? You see? There's not too many people. I'm surprised. We're too old, like, you know, like ACDC is like rock band people, okay? Okay. So anyway, this is why I'm so excited. Just last week, we posted in the archive this paper that has like about 40 authors, and it took 5 years to write. The final results of our DARPA project, we were successful in making the top organic lasers in the world, and that's what I'm gonna end my talk with, okay? So the sun never sets in our empire because all the labs are around all the time zones in the world, and it's controlled by a central software system. So a big part of our paper is the fact that we have a worldwide distributed laboratory that tracks the shippings of FedEx between one lab and the other, does experiments across the globe, and actually that's how we build this experimental. Some of the fragments for the lasers we make in some lab, for example, UBC in British Columbia. Some of them we make in the United States, or some of them in Glasgow, and then we ship them to Toronto to test, and then, or assemble the fragments and then test, okay? And then we ship to Japan to make the devices. So it's like, you know, so I am a Mexican and I like to ship white powders around the world, okay? So we had to invent some machine learning tools like asynchronous Bayesian optimization. I won't spend too much time about it, but we had a lot of fun also doing data science. But now remember the Lego block. How can we pull this off? Because my friend Marty Burke at Urbana has this concept of making organic molecules like Lego blocks with a chemistry called Borotida that I'm not going to tell you too much about. But the point given is that we're able to actually combinatorially make these molecules, just basically building, these are like Star Wars spaceships, like the wings, the Lincoln and the Corn, they really look like TIE fighters. So we basically do combinatorics on these TIE fighters, and they're all like our organic laser molecules. So now, of the 190,000 space, we have actually made about 1,500 or so of them, between 1,000 and 5,500, I forget. We were able to make, for example, of this batch, of these molecules, about 500 in 3 months. That means we can make, in a weekend, 4 times the number of molecules Chihaya has published, right? So game over for Chihaya in some sense. I'm glad he's collaborating with us, but basically now you can do this. This is the software interface. I'm spending too much time, so I'm gonna skip it. But you can see how we spent a lot of time optimizing the reaction conditions and setting up the robot. This was about 2 years. So we spent 1 year building the robot, about 2 years doing condition screening and testing the robot and debugging all the stuff that happens in the robot. Then 3 months doing the hypercube sampling to train the AI. And then 3 more months to actually run the Bayesian optimization campaign. And then we ran out of money and time and patience, okay? So this is when we stopped and we said, okay, this is when we're gonna publish. And we spent 2 months or so writing the paper. So now how cool is that? The best, I'll show you another plot where we show you how many molecules we have that are better than the state of the art. Here, what is it? Yeah, sorry if this sucks, but this line is the best molecules that Chihaya had. All of the points that you see here with my laser pointer are better than Chihaya. So it turns out we just expanded the space of organic lasers, right? We send them to him in Japan, and we have the 3 molecules that are better than any molecule he has. No, 33 that are better than any molecule he has in some categories, and 3 that are better in all categories, okay? There's one category we don't know how to optimize for in my lab, so it's kind of like taking lottery. So it could be better or worse, so after 33 of them, we have 3 of them that are absolute world champions, okay? And here they are. I'm showing them to you. They're open source. We didn't patent them, so because we know we can make better ones. Why should we patent these ones? We'll patent better ones tomorrow, and that's it, right? So anyway, these are our lasers. This is how they look like. You're seeing the brightest molecules in the world. Okay? How am I doing on time? Maybe I have like 5 more minutes, and that's it. Okay. So that's how the organic lasers look like. Okay, so now let me end this talk telling you about the Acceleration Consortium. Melanie and Chris talked about this. This is the initiative that we're building at the University of Toronto. And let me tell you a little bit about it. When I did my first part of my career in Boston, I was a professor at Harvard. I was very inspired by the Broad Institute between MIT and Harvard that created the biotech industry in Boston, right? So this is the software world, right? Roughly, Boston is the biotech world. Well, be prepared because we're making Toronto the materials world, right? So if we're successful, we're going to be as influential, hopefully, as Stuart Shriver and Langer and all these people that started the Broad Institute. We want to make the Acceleration Consortium, which has a similar investment or larger investment, make Toronto the home of AI for materials. So we really want us to, our ecosystem to be the ecosystem where all the materials for your batteries, your drugs, come from. And that's the most untapped wealth in the world that is missing for AI. So if we are successful at that, Canada will be doing really well. So how many of you are Canadians? Hopefully all of you move back to Toronto after 5 years, okay? What are you doing here? Okay, so I told you already about the difference between a linear discovery process and a self-driving lab process. So I want to spend time also in Q&A, I guess. But we're also trying to do things that help the world, sustainability and health. This is not just me, obviously. There's tons of faculty at the University of Toronto that are working on this. For example, Dave Sinton in carbon capture, Professor Jason Hartrick-Simpers in corrosion-resistant alloys, precision drugs, Professor Christine Allen that I mentioned already, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Across science, engineering, and also many departments that are not obvious, like humanities. We have people in humanities and economics, social sciences, et cetera. Okay? So what are we doing? And we're actually recruiting, so you could apply. We came up with an idea inspired by actually the concept called Focus Research Organization. The idea of having scientists embedded inside of a university with a lot of autonomy, okay, well paid, a little bit like the Manhattan Project if you watch Oppenheimer, right? But without trying to make a nuclear bomb, that kind of idea of being focused on something. And basically we have about, I don't know, this is faculty, sorry. This is about how many faculty we're hiring, and actually we're getting news about new faculty being hired on this space. And again, here is us in the newspaper talking about our $200 million grant that was already mentioned. And sorry, I don't have the slide. Yeah, here is the slide. 30 staff scientists, 5 software engineers, 4 staff scholars, 3 product managers. The university didn't even have a category for product manager. They don't even know what to do with that. I want a product manager. So what the heck is that, right? And we need product managers because we want them to actually make these self-driving labs as a product for the scientists. So we need to make sure the self-driving lab is not just a scientific toy, but it's actually built in a proper way. So if anybody here is a product manager and wants to move back to Toronto, we actually have 3 open positions for product managers. We haven't hired our first one. So please come, or if you know a product manager that is Canadian or wants to go back to the north, please let us know, okay? Business developers, Porik Foley is here. He leads our business development team. If you want to talk about business with AC, talk to that guy back there. He knows everything. He just hired one under him, but he's looking for a second one. So if you want to work with Porik, talk to him as well. So we're hiring. If you want to talk about a staff scientist or a software engineer or a staff scholar, this is really cool. Staff scholars. These people are working on how to make sure that we interface with our communities, including indigenous communities and all the communities in the world, right? So like we want to make sure we are belonging. Every molecule belongs to the environment, okay? So it's a very important problem, to the environment and society. So we have also staff scholars. Some of the people that we have talked to, some of the people that are our partners, we came here to talk to many of the people listed here as well. I don't know if Santiago, are you here? I don't know if Santiago came at the end, but Santiago from Intel. Obviously he's not here, but we came to talk to many people. We collaborate with Genentech and Roche. We collaborate with Merck Europe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, several companies, I already mentioned Intel. And these are a lot of the people that we have been talking. For example, today we went to talk to our MIT friends that donated some equipment to us for this project. So very interested again in thinking about open science, training of the new generations, how to make sure that we're interfaced with our all the Canadians. And these are our main goals. We believe there's no time for science as usual. And these are the 4 things that we care about. And I think with this slide, I just want to end, and maybe this one. Well, maybe this one, Melanie. Melanie and I are fundraising, so open your wallets. We're building this building, okay, for the Home of the Acceleration Consortium, okay? It's starting to be built, but we don't know how to pay for it.
Should ask if
Yeah.
anyone knows where this building is. Does anyone recognize anything on the bottom?
Yeah, does anybody recognize these horrible symbols here? I actually wanted to get rid of them, but actually they didn't let me. Who likes, you know what I'm talking about? You were in the campus.
Lash Miller?
Yeah.
Anyone? Lash Miller?
This is Lash Miller. It's an extension of a Lash Miller, and you can see here this chemical alchemy symbols that I wanted to remove. But how many people like those alchemy symbols? Raise your hand. Okay. How many people? Yeah. All right, and anyway, on that note, I'm gonna end now. We're cementing Canada's leadership materials, and I'm open for questions. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alain. We have time for a couple of questions, and then there's a lot more time after that for chit-chat over drinks and food. But any questions right now?
Please.
Testing the materials for their properties in bulk, with some sort of flow, laser goes in, output goes out, and then sorting based on that output rather than just testing one at a time.
Yes, so flow synthesis and flow testing. We have a new partnership that we're building with a company called Snapdragon, actually founded by one of the U of T graduates in extending our tools to flow chemistry. I do not think we're very agnostic about batch or flow methods. I think this particular reaction, this metaboronate coupled Suzuki coupling, was a little bit easier for us to do in batch, but there's also ways of doing these things in flow. And again, we're starting to build some flow systems. I do not think that will be the bottleneck because the testing still needs to pass by an HPLC, which will just basically be semi-batch based anyway. So maybe we can get a factor of 2 or something by doing what you're suggesting, but happy to talk to you afterwards. Yeah. Yes. And maybe tell me where you graduated from and what are you doing now? Actually, yeah, well, I'll ask him. Yeah.
Thanks.
What was your name?
Arib.
Okay.
So not an engineer or a chemist. So I'm going to ask you a very rudimentary question.
Nobody's perfect, yeah. Yeah.
So how much of what you'd say like roadblocks that you face in your research are funding versus technological roadblocks that you're seeing? Because you did mention at one point that you ran out of funding, right? So what is the biggest challenge you see? Is it a lack of funding or do you just run up against the technological wall?
Well, I mean, in that particular case, I didn't run out of funding because we just got $150 million from the Canadian government as a team, right? What I meant by that, we ran out of DARPA funding. So I was not going to be able to fund my other 5 partners. And we were all getting kind of tired, right? Like once it started working, we just want to publish the paper and get onto more complicated lasers, right? Ultimately, we want to empower the career of these guys. It's complicated. In academia, you also want to publish papers to make sure people get jobs, right? So what are our constraints? There's a lot of technical constraints. The reason we wrote this grant is because we think that we need to engineer the hell out of these things. Like my robot is basically built not more by a scientist and not with a lot of engineering techniques. So it's not as robust as I wanted. I wanted to have a very higher uptime, higher throughputs, more reliable, more modular, etc. So part of the funding that we got is to actually make these things more robust because people haven't made them before. So that's one of our biggest challenges, right? Also staffing, we really want to have super top, amazing staff scientists. How many people applied, Porik? Close to 1,000. I don't even know if I should disclose that. Close to 1,000 people have applied to those very positions, right? So it's a very demanded position, but still finding those amazing scientists that are going to do it, I mean, it's hard, yeah.
Okay, I think we have certainly a lot of interesting conversation once people refresh their drinks. So with that, please join me again in thanking Alain for this very inspiring talk. And let me just say, as I think both Chris and I alluded to, how grateful we are for our alumni. You are our biggest ambassadors. So I'll just make a few small requests from you. If you have former classmates that aren't connected with us anymore, ask them to go on the U of T website and update their email because we'd love to invite them out. If you are in a position where you can hire graduate students internships, undergraduate internships, or you can connect us with somebody in your organization that's looking for the talent coming out of U of T, connect with Vicky or Roger. Vicky and Roger, wave if you're back there. They run our internship programs. Make sure that our students today have the opportunities that we know many people have from Canada and sometimes dominate from a university about 100 kilometers down the 401 in Ontario. We need to change the tide on that a little bit. And of course, think about how you might support the university if you're in a position to provide some financial support to make sure that all students who come to the University of Toronto and want to study there have the opportunities to work with fabulous people like Alain. With that, thanks so much for joining us and looking forward to continuing the conversation.